Okay, so we are now recording. So hello and welcome to everyone tuning in from all over the country and world. My name is Christopher. I am the program coordinator here at Wolf Park, and I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Tom Gable for this really exciting webinar. Tom is the project lead for the Voyageurs Wolf Project and recently completed his PhD at the University of Minnesota. He has been studying wolves in the greater Voyageurs ecosystem since 2014, when he first started his master's at Northern Michigan University. Tom has been particularly interested in wolf-beaver interactions, and most of his graduate work has been focused on understanding how wolves hunt and kill beavers, and conversely, how beavers can avoid these fatal encounters with wolves. During and after his bachelor's in biology at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, Dr. Gable worked as a wolf research technician in Grand Teton National Park and on the Minnesota Wolf and Deer Project in Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. He also did an internship here at Wolf Park during this time, and we always love to talk about Tom's research during our tours and public programs here at Wolf Park. So Tom, thank you again for being with us here this evening. And before I turn over the virtual mic, I would like to ask everyone who is listening to type any questions you have into the Q&A box rather than the chat box if you're listening via Zoom. And if you're listening via Facebook, just type your questions into the comments and we will do our best to get all of these answered at the end of the program. So without further ado, here is Dr. Tom Gable.
All right, thanks much. And I want to begin by thanking Wolf Park for inviting me to give this webinar. My internship at Wolf Park was my first ever experience doing any wildlife related work, and it was a great memory. And so I'm really happy now to be able to do a webinar for them. So I'm going to get my screen pulled up here, or my PowerPoint. So 1 second. Okay. So today I'm going to be sharing what I think is some really exciting work we've been doing on the Voyageurs Wolf Project and the work we've been doing trying to understand how wolves actually go about hunting and killing beavers. And this talk is really a story of how we figured out how to study wolf predation on beavers, how we've learned that wolves ambush beavers, and then how we have studied how wolves ambush beavers. And I do want to note this picture here actually is a photo I was sent from someone in Saskatchewan, and this is one of the very few photos that exists of a wolf actually killing or attacking a beaver, which is why I used it to start off the presentation here. Before I begin, I need to acknowledge my collaborators on this project, Austin Homkes from the University of Minnesota, Dr. Joe Bump from the University of Minnesota, Sean Johnson-Bice from the University of Manitoba, and then Dr. Steve Windels from Voyageurs National Park. I also need to acknowledge all of the field technicians that have worked on our project. Our work is really field intensive. We do a ton of field work, and without the dedication and the many challenging miles and hours that our field crews put in, none of the information I present today would have been possible. So we're really thankful for their efforts and how they've assisted our project. So I want to start off with just a brief overview of what our project does for anyone who's unfamiliar before we jump into wolf-beaver interactions. So the Voyageurs Wolf Project is a University of Minnesota project, and we collaborate with Voyageurs National Park and other agencies as well. And the project's been doing intensive wolf research since 2015. And in particular, we've been studying the summer ecology of wolves. So the objective of our project is to understand the reproductive ecology and predation behavior of wolves during the summer in the greater Voyageurs ecosystem. So wolves are really doing two main things during the summer. They're having their pups and raising their pups, and then they're hunting and killing food to feed themselves and to provision their pups. So if we want to have a really comprehensive understanding of wolves during the summer, we have to have a detailed understanding of both of these facets of wolf ecology. So many of you might not be aware of where Voyageurs National Park or the greater Voyageurs ecosystem is. It's in northern Minnesota, right on the boundary of Ontario. It's represented by this yellow outline here. And the greater Voyageurs ecosystem includes Voyageurs National Park, which is the yellow outline here, and then a big chunk of land south of the park as well, which is sort of captured by this white polygon. And the reason that we do work in this large area is because Voyageurs National Park has sort of a weird shape, and there are very few wolf pack territories that exist solely within the boundaries of the park. So here's a map showing where the different pack territories are. You can see there's really only 2 packs that remain in the park sort of full time. The rest of the packs sort of straddle the park boundary. And clearly that park boundary doesn't mean a whole lot to wolves in the area. So if we want to understand the wolves of Voyageurs National Park, we have to understand what's going on outside of the park, because those factors are definitely going to influence the wolves that use the park. Okay, so now we're going to sort of dive into what I think is the fascinating world of wolf-beaver interactions. And I want to start with just a general overview of sort of what's known about wolf-beaver interactions before we sort of home in on the Voyagers work we've been doing. So biologists have known for quite a while that beavers are important prey for wolves in many areas of North America and Eurasia. And I should say seasonally important. They're important during the ice-free seasons. And biologists have known this based on a variety of wolf diet studies spanning back to the 1960s, where biologists have collected a bunch of wolf scats and looked at what's in them and found a lot of beaver remains. Some of this work has shown that beavers can actually make up to 50% of wolf diets during the summertime. So beavers can be pretty important. However, despite the fact that beavers are important prey at certain times of the year, wolf-beaver interactions have virtually been ignored. I think really due to 2 main reasons. The first is that studying wolf-beaver interactions during the summertime is really challenging, as studying wolf predation in the summer has really been an outsized challenge. The second is that beavers are just not as important socioeconomically as a prey species. People don't care that much if wolves are eating beavers, and in many instances, a lot of people probably would prefer that wolves eat beavers because beavers cause problems for a lot of people. Similarly, beavers just aren't as important for recreational hunting opportunities, such as the way that moose and elk and deer and things are. No one really cares that much if wolves are killing and eating beavers. But like I said, beavers are important prey for wolves, and it's particularly interesting when we look at the areas that wolves and beavers co-occur across North America and Eurasia as well. So here's a map that shows where wolves and beavers are co-occurring throughout North America. And the orange polygon is all the areas that wolves and beavers co-occur. And you can see that they occur across a wide portion of our continent. And this is just North America, not including Europe and Asia. So wolf-beaver interactions are really important on sort of a large scale, because beavers are important prey for wolves, and beavers are really important ecological species because of the way they alter ecosystems. So wolf-beaver interactions probably are it's probably quite valuable to have information on wolf-beaver interactions, and that's part of the reason we started our work. So to understand wolf predation on beavers and how wolves go about hunting beavers, we have to understand what beavers are like as a prey species. So as many people probably are aware, beavers build lodges that provide protection from predators, and beavers also build dams on streams and rivers and things like this. And by damming up these waterways, it creates ponds, and those ponds provide safety for beavers as well, because it provides deep water, and predators can't catch beavers in deep water. Beavers are really vulnerable whenever they leave the safety of water. And because of that, beavers rarely go very far from water. They always stay within probably 50 to 60 meters of water at most. Generally, they're staying even closer to water than that. And that's just because they want to be able to escape to water should they encounter a predator. Additionally, beavers generally don't stay on land for very long periods of time either. They probably want to minimize their exposure to predation. And so they generally make several short, small trips on land, as opposed to like sitting on land for an hour, cutting a tree or something like that. When beavers do decide to go on land, they have a few tools to detect predators. Well, really, they have one main tool, and that main tool is scent. Beavers have really well-developed ability or sense of smell, and so they rely on this to detect predators. And the reason that this is really their only defense on land is because they don't have very good hearing. And they can hear things, but it's not great, and they have terrible eyesight. They have these black little beady eyes that really are not very good. And that's because beavers live in darkness for half the year. And so their eyesight isn't going to be well developed. And because they don't have good eyesight, they can't really see predators that aren't moving. So really, they're relying almost entirely on scent to detect predators. Now, let's say they're on land and they actually run into a predator. Do they have any physical defenses? And the answer is they do have some physical defenses. Their primary defense mechanism is getting back to water. But the way that they would say fight off a predator are using things like their sharp incisors or their front teeth, which are really sharp, and beavers have really muscular jaws, so they could do some real damage with their front teeth. The other thing that is in beavers' favor, so to speak, is their large weight. Beavers can be up to 60 pounds, which in our area is often the size of an adult wolf. And beavers have this sort of football-like shape, and they're just big hunks of muscle. And it's particularly interesting because beavers don't have any neck. So if you're a predator like a wolf, there's no easy place to grab a beaver to kill it. And so beaver's size and sort of strength is one of their assets in terms of trying to get back to the water once they've been attacked. But really, the only way a beaver is going to escape an attack from a large predator is reaching water. A beaver is never going to fend off a predator just by its own strength. So then what do we know about wolves and beavers in Voyagers? So beavers are typically vulnerable during the ice-free season, which is about 7 months in our area and goes from April to October. Beavers can make up to 42% of wolf pack diets during this time period, meaning that beaver are the primary prey of some wolf packs during the summertime. And we know that individual wolves can kill up to 42 beavers. And that's pretty astounding. To put 42 beavers into perspective, a typical beaver lodge or family has 5 beavers in our area. So that means that one wolf by itself removed 8.5 beaver lodges in a summer. So that's pretty crazy. One of the reasons why beavers are such an important prey species for wolves in our area is their sheer abundance. So this map here shows all of the active beaver colonies we identified in our study area a few years ago. And you can see that there are a lot of lodges. So each one of these yellow pins is a unique beaver family or lodge. And there are over 1,000 beaver lodges marked in this map. To give you an idea of what this actually looks like from the air, this is a photo I took a couple years during our beaver surveys. And what you can see is the landscape is basically just dense forests interspersed with all of these beaver-created wetlands. And in this particular shot, these white arrows point to active beaver families. And so if you're a wolf and you can figure out how to capitalize on this food source, that's a lot of food out there. And so when we started our project in 2015, we were really interested in trying to understand wolf-beaver interactions. And we were really interested in this question of how do wolves actually go about hunting beavers? Right when we started doing our work on wolves and beavers, this great book had just come out called Wolves on the Hunt, The Behavior of Wolves Hunting Wild Prey, which is by Dave Meach, Doug Smith, and Dan McNulty. And the book is really a comprehensive review of how wolves hunt their various prey species. And the section in this book on beavers was 3 paragraphs long. And to give some perspective, the book was a couple hundred pages long. And in that section on beavers, they concluded that there were no actual descriptions of wolves hunting beavers. So basically, no one knew how wolves actually did this. There were a lot of ideas and speculations about how wolves might go about doing this, but there's virtually no data on the topic. So this got us really interested in trying to answer this question if it was even possible for us to answer it. We weren't sure. So with sort of this information coming from this book, or not information, but this book sort of spurring on our interest, as well as our other interest in trying to understand wolf predation on beavers, in 2015, we set out to really understand wolf-beaver interactions. And when we first started doing our work, we were sort of interested in the hunting behavior, but we were more focused on just trying to find where wolves actually killed beavers, because up until our project, no one had been able to successfully find where wolves had killed beavers routinely. So that was our first challenge, was just to see if we could find where wolves were killing beavers. And so the way we did that was we fit wolves with GPS collars that take locations every 20 minutes. And this is still what we're doing to this day. So we fit the wolves with these GPS collars. The collars, like I said, took 20 locations every 20 minutes, and the collars are uploading this GPS collar data to a website multiple times a day. So we can log on to a website and do log on to a website, and it looks something like this. This particular map shows a week's worth of GPS locations from one of our collared wolves. So the way that we started trying to find where wolves killed beavers is we would download a week's worth of GPS collar data like this. We would run it through a computer program. And what that computer program would do is it would identify everywhere our collared wolves spent more than 20 minutes in the same general area. The idea being that anywhere wolves remain in the same area for more than 20 minutes could potentially be a kill, and so we should go in and investigate it. So if we took these locations, ran it through our computer program, what we'd get on the other side is this. And each one of these groups of points, which are referred to as a cluster of GPS locations, are areas that we would go search on foot and look for evidence of a kill occurring. And if a kill didn't occur, we would be keeping track of what else we found at that site. So the good news was, as we started doing this work, it quickly became apparent that we were going to be able to find where wolves were killing beavers, albeit finding where wolves kill beavers is a lot more challenging than it might seem. And that's just because wolves consume almost everything once they kill a beaver, and they leave virtually nothing behind. Here's a good example of what I mean by that. This is actually a photo showing where a wolf killed a beaver. The wolf killed and consumed the beaver right in that white polygon there. And what we think happened here is there was a young beaver traveling through the creek on the right-hand side of the photo. The wolf caught it, pulled it out, and then consumed it in that area that's sort of highlighted. The next photo is going to be me looking straight down into that white circle, and you can see what I saw. And this is what I saw. It doesn't really look like a whole lot. You can kind of see where the grass has been pushed down a little bit, and this is where the wolf was presumably laying down and consuming this beaver. And then all that was left of this beaver were its two front teeth right there. And below the teeth were the beaver's stomach contents, and then there's actually a little tuft of fur to the left, and that's it. And this is pretty typical of a lot of the beavers that wolves are killing. And so this makes it really challenging to identify these if you don't know what you're looking for. But luckily, like I said, we were able to develop methods that allowed us to figure out how to find where wolves have killed beavers. And since we started our work in 2015, we've now searched 11,816 clusters of GPS locations. And in doing so, have found 214 beavers that have been killed by wolves. And through doing this work, we started to figure out very quickly about of the general areas that wolves would actually kill beavers. And so I'm going to go through these here of all the areas that we generally find wolves killing beavers, because it's going to be important for sort of understanding where wolves then eventually ambush beavers. So wolves will kill beavers pretty much anywhere around a beaver pond, but there's some specific features where wolves will kill beavers more than others. So we frequently have found beavers that have been killed on dams, where wolves have caught beavers that are working on the beaver dams and then killed them right at or below the beaver dam. Feeding areas are an important one. So feeding areas are spots along the shoreline of beaver ponds where beavers are feeding on small shrubs or grasses or trees and things like that. But there's no really defined trails. It's just these areas that beavers are sort of mulling about. Wolves will kill beavers at feeding canals. Feeding canals are these long channels that beavers actually dig out of the landscape. And then by digging them out, they fill with water. And this allows beavers to travel further inland in the safety of water. And it also eases their ability to transport wood back to their lodge because they can float it that way. So wolves will pull beavers out of these feeding canals and consume them on the edges of them. Feeding stations, these are areas where beavers will just sit on the edge of their pond and strip sticks from trees they've felled, and wolves will ambush and catch beavers at those feeding stations. So this is just an example of where a feeding station might be. Feeding trails, now this is one where beavers are particularly vulnerable. Feeding trails are trails that beavers create that go inland where they then can cut trees, and beavers use the same feeding trails over and over to cut the same tree. So these trails are very obvious, and they're very risky for beavers because this is where beavers are actually traveling inland and leaving the safety of water behind by a large margin. The forest interior, so we found a lot of instances where beavers have just been killed in the middle of the woods, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. In ponds, we've had some instances where wolves have actually gone out into the shallow ends of ponds and attacked and killed beavers in those areas and then pulled the beaver out of it. At lodges, active lodges, we've had some wolves actually hop out onto active lodges in ponds and make kills, or kill beavers at lodges that were placed on the shoreline. Scent mounds, so beavers create what are called scent mounds. These are piles of mud and vegetation that beavers put on the shores of their ponds, and these actually mark their territory so that if other beavers come by, they know it's an occupied territory. So wolves will kill beavers in those areas. Shorelines, when beavers are just doing things on the shoreline, we're not always sure how wolves catch them, but we found several kills on shorelines. And then small waterways is the last area where we've seen a lot of wolf-killed beavers. And by small waterways, we mean little creeks, streams, little rivers, things like that. Waterways that beavers are using for travel. What's interesting is from the work that we've done is that almost 30% of all beavers killed by wolves have been attacked in the water and then killed. And the reason that's interesting is prior to our work, the assumption had been that if beavers reached water, regardless of how deep it was, that they were going to be sort of immune from predation. But our work shows that beavers are not necessarily immune from predation, particularly if they're in shallow water, which I would say is, a meter deep or so. Once they get into really deep water, then they are sort of immune from predation, it seems. But in the shallower water, they certainly are still at risk of getting killed. So when we started visiting these 11,000, or not 11,000, started visiting some of these clusters early on, we started to realize how wolves were spending time around beaver habitats. And in particular, what we realized is that wolves were bedding down next to areas that beavers were using a lot, such as beaver dams, feeding trails, lodges, things like that. And the wolves were just waiting there for hours at a time. And so it quickly became apparent to us that wolves are actually trying to ambush beavers. They were waiting in these areas, hoping that a beaver would come on shore and then they could attack and kill it. And so that was a really fascinating revelation for us, because when we started our work, wolves were not really thought of as ambush predators. They were thought of as cursorial predators, which means that they primarily hunt and kill their prey by outrunning and outlasting it. Wolves are not thought to use a lot of sort of secrecy and tactics and things like that. But our work showed that wolves actually will use ambush strategies to catch certain prey. So that was really fascinating. And once we realized that wolves were ambushing beavers, we started to collect a bunch of information on where wolves were actually choosing to ambush beavers. And so the rest of my talk is going to focus on that sort of aspect of trying to figure out where wolves were actually choosing to ambush beavers. But before I continue, I want to show what one of these ambushing sites actually looks like in the field, or how did we actually figure out that wolves were ambushing beavers. And so I'm going to show this video. The volume is a little soft, so if you can, turn your volume up a little bit. But I'm going to narrate through one instance of an ambushing attempt that we documented.
So it's September 15th, 2019, and I'm at a spot where one of our colleagues with 1079 was attempting to catch an ambush beavers. This is just a really great example of what wolves do and how they try to actually catch beavers. So right here behind me, you can see this aspen here the beavers have been working on. I'm at the end of a 31-meter long feeding trail, and wolf B079 bedded down right here. So literally about 1.5 meters from where we're at behind to catch beavers. And this is generally what wolves are doing. They're bedding down and they're waiting for substantial periods of time for a beaver to waddle down this trail, work on this tree, and that's when the wolf can ambush it. So B079 was at this particular bed for over 4 hours waiting for beavers. What I'm going to do is actually turn the camera around and show what the beaver would have seen if it was coming up this trail and 79 was bedded here. So give me a quick second here. So I'm going to put my backpack in the bed, and I should note, the way we know this is a bed where B079 bedded down is because there's wolf hair all throughout the bed. So you can see little white hairs there. It's on the base of that tree as well. I'm going to put my backpack here, so that's where 79 would have been bedded down. And you can see it would have been right next to that tree. The trail that the beavers were coming up through goes right through there, and it actually comes out of a little river there. So if I was a beaver, I'd be coming up the trail like this.
and I'd be slowly coming up, and hidden behind that balsam tree would be the wolf. I'd be following the trail, and that's where 7-9 would be waiting. And if the interaction occurred, the beaver would likely be dead because it's so far from the water. So just a really cool example of this. And what we've learned about how wolves ambush beavers comes largely through documenting these spots where wolves are spending time waiting to ambush beavers.
So that really describes, or at least shows, what one of these ambushing sites looks like in the field. And so for the rest of my talk, when I'm talking about these ambushing sites, or what we call beaver hunting attempts, just keep in mind that that's what we're referring to, are those areas. So when we searched these 11,800 clusters of GPS locations, we kept track of every instance where we found a beaver hunting attempt, or where wolves were waiting in ambush for beavers. And when we found these ambushing sites, we recorded a bunch of different information. In particular, we recorded how far the wolf was bedding from water, how far the wolf was waiting from where it was expecting beavers to be. So in this instance, how far the wolf was waiting from this feeding trail it was waiting, or it was expecting beavers to be active on. And then we kept track of how the wolf positioned itself relative to where beavers were active, so that we could take into account the wind direction. Remember that beavers' primary method of detecting predators on land is smell or scent. And so if wolves want to successfully ambush beavers, it would make sense they would have to wait in areas that take into account wind direction. So we collected all of this information to really answer this question of where and how are wolves actually ambushing beavers. And we had a few predictions of how we thought wolves might go about doing this, or ideas that we thought made pretty good sense to us. Our first was that we thought wolves would wait downwind of beaver activity, or they would wait in areas where beavers would be unable to detect them via scent. And that's, again, just to avoid beavers' primary defense mechanism, which is identifying predators via scent. The second is that we thought wolves would wait close to where beavers would be active on land, because beavers have terrible eyesight, so why wouldn't a wolf wait really close to where the beavers might actually appear? And secondly, wolves, we thought, would want to get as close as possible to where the beaver would be prior to launching an ambush. Because if beavers only have to get back to water, it likely means that wolves have a very short window to actually catch a beaver before it gets back to water. And so it makes sense that the wolf would want to be able to make contact with the beaver without the beaver ever having a clue that the wolf is actually coming after it. And then the third is that when possible, we expected wolves would try to wait far away from water. Our idea, or at least our thinking here, was that beavers can be probably pretty tough prey for wolves to hunt and kill at times. And so wolves would probably want to attack beavers as far away from water as they could, just to increase their probability of successfully killing a beaver. And then our fourth prediction was that wolves would kill beavers in the same places where they're waiting to ambush them. So that seems to make pretty intuitive sense to us, we thought. So I'm going to go through sort of what we found for each of these predictions. But first, just to give you an idea of the sample size here, we have documented over 1,000 ambushing attempts to date. But what I'm talking about today is basically the work we did from 2015 to 2019, because that's sort of when we've done a formal analysis. And during that time, we documented almost 740 ambushing attempts from 28 different wolves. So to our first sort of question or prediction, are wolves waiting downwind of beaver activity? What we found is that at 89% of ambushing attempts, wolves waited downwind or in an area where they would have been undetectable via scent. At 5% of the ambushing attempts, wolves clearly were upwind or would have been detected by scent. And then there were 6% of these attempts that were in the maybe category, where we just couldn't say one way or the other. There's too much uncertainty. Nonetheless, we think this provides pretty strong evidence that most of the time wolves are choosing ambushing locations that take into account the wind direction, and this is probably to counter beavers' primary defense mechanism, which is scent. So then our second prediction, or our second question, I should say, do wolves wait close to where beavers are active? And this is what we found. This is a histogram, and on our y-axis is the number of ambushing attempts, And then on the x-axis is the distance that wolves were wading from beaver activity. And what we found is, like we expected, wolves are generally wading very close to where beavers will be active on land. So on average, wolves are wading about 3.5 meters from where beavers will be active, but there's a lot of hunting attempts or ambushing attempts that are only 1 meter away from where beavers will be active on land. I mean, again, this we think is to counter, or not to counter, but to capitalize on beavers' poor eyesight. So then our third question, when possible, do wolves try to wade far away from water? And this one is a little bit more nuanced, and I hope it comes through this, or comes through with my explanation here. But what we found sort of initially looked like this. So this again is another histogram, and on our y-axis is the number of ambushing attempts, and on our x-axis is the distance that the wolves waded from water at the various ambushing attempts. And what we see is that typically wolves are wading pretty close to water. The vast majority of ambushing attempts are less than 20 meters from water, and the average ambushing attempt is 10 meters from water. But there are some ambushing attempts as far as 20, 40, 60, and even 80 meters from water. So the question then is sort of what's going on here? Why are there so many attempts that are really close to water, but then there's some that are really far away from water? And the reason why it sort of looks this way is because most beaver features that wolves are wading next to, such as dams or lodges, are right next to the water. And so wolves have no choice but to wait really close to the water if they want to ambush a beaver in those areas. So for example, if you want to ambush a beaver at a dam, you have to wait right at the dam. You can't wait 30 meters away in the woods trying to catch a beaver there. It probably wouldn't work. The reason though we have so many hunting attempts with that where wolves are wading, 20, 30, 50 meters from water is because wolves are wading on feeding trails that go inland quite a ways. And because feeding trails can be quite long, wolves have a choice of how close they want to wade to the water. And so to really get at the question of do wolves choose to wade further from water when possible, we have to sort of zoom in on only the ambushing attempts that are on feeding trails, because these are areas, again, where wolves have a choice. And so we can kind of get in the mind of the wolf, so to speak, and see how they're making decisions about where to wade in relation to water. And so that's what we did. And our prediction here is pretty simple. It's that wolves would wade further from water on longer feeding trails. And so to answer this, when we found ambushing attempts along feeding trails, we recorded the length of that feeding trail, and we recorded how far the wolf waded from water along that feeding trail. And so what we found was this. This is the results of that. And on our y-axis is the distance wolves waded from water along a feeding trail, and then the x-axis is the length of that feeding trail. And sort of as we would expect, as the feeding trail length increases, so does the distance that the wolves waded from water. But the important question here is, what would we expect if wolves were choosing spots randomly? And this is where things get a little bit nuanced. But basically, the pattern, there appears to be a pattern, but does that really prove that wolves are choosing to wade further from water? And the short answer is no. So what we did is we actually used a simulation approach, and we said, like, okay, if wolves were choosing to wade totally by random, what would we expect? And this graph shows what we would expect. Each one of these blue dots is a data point from our simulation. And you can see by simulating what randomness would look like, we see that as feeding trails get longer, the sort of spread of where wolves could wade gets longer or gets larger. And interestingly, because the trails get longer, wolves can choose to wade further from water, and on average would actually wade further from water just by randomness alone. So what we see here is this green line represents what we would expect by random. This yellow line is what we documented. This is the same trend line that was in that graph I showed just a few seconds ago. So the takeaway here is wolves appear to be picking locations randomly with respect to distance from water. And this hopefully might be an illustration that clarifies again sort of why we've noticed that trend. So basically what we found is if a trail that a wolf is wading next to is 10 meters, the wolf is going to wait 9 meters from water. Let's say the trail now is 30 meters, the wolf would be wading 18 meters from water. And then if the trail is 50 meters, the wolf would be 26 meters from water. And so the reason that the distance the wolf is wading, the reason why that increases as the trail gets longer is because the midway point of those feeding trails is just further from water. So the average distance, or the mean distance between the end of the trail and water, increases as the trail gets longer. If that makes absolutely no sense, or I did a terrible job of explaining that, forgive me. But I know that that's probably a little bit more challenging, or it might not make complete sense, so I apologize. So then we'll come to our last sort of question prediction here. And that is, do wolves kill beavers in the same places they wait to ambush them? We expected they would, but what we found out is that's not the case. So in this graph, the y-axis is the percent of attempts or kills, depending which category it is. And then on the x-axis are all the different habitats where wolves, or habitat features that wolves kill beavers at. So these are all the things that I went through sort of at the beginning. And what we see is there's a few really large differences between where wolves are waiting to ambush beavers and where they're actually killing them. In particular are the kills and attempts at feeding trails. About 50% of all ambushing attempts are occurring on feeding trails, but only about 25% of all kills are occurring on feeding trails. So there's a huge difference there. Similarly, if we look at it the other way, there are a lot of kills that are happening in this forest interior category, as well as in these small waterways, but very few actual ambushing attempts at those spots. And so the question is, why do we see such large differences here? And we think the answer to that is opportunism. And so this is what we didn't factor in when we were sort of formulating our predictions. So wolves do kill beavers using ambush strategies, but they also kill beavers opportunistically as they come across them. And so I think a lot of the challenge that we have is we can't actually measure, using GPS collar data alone, which kills are the result of ambushing and which are the result of opportunism, because the GPS collar data just isn't a fine enough resolution. We've tried our hardest to try to figure something out, and we just haven't been able to figure anything out yet. So what we think is that most of the kills that we found in small waterways and the forest interior categories are actually opportunistic predation events and are of wolves killing dispersing beavers. So dispersing beavers are young beavers that leave their family and they set off sort of on an adventure to find their own sort of place to call home. And when these young beavers disperse and leave their family, they primarily travel by using small little creeks like the one in this photo here, or they travel across land. In both instances, they're really vulnerable because they don't have deep water they can retreat to. And so if a wolf finds a dispersing beaver, it almost certainly can kill it quite easily. And so that's why we think we find so many kills sort of in the forest interior or in these small waterways. A wolf would never come just sit and bed down by a creek for hours at a time hoping a beaver would come through, or at least we've not documented them doing that. So it seems that they're likely just running around their territory, and then they find a beaver that's crawling through a little creek or crawling over land, and they kill it. So then if we sort of step back or look at this as the whole, what does all of this really tell us about how wolves hunt beavers? And I think it comes down to this. Wolves seem to have a basic understanding of beaver behavior. So wolves will come to a spot around a beaver pond and they'll bed down for hours at a time. And oftentimes they're bedding down next to a feeding trail or a dam, someplace where they probably can't see a beaver, probably can't even hear a beaver, but they know that if they bed down there and wait, there's a certain probability that a beaver will come on land while they're there. Not only that, but when choosing where to wait, wolves are picking spots that counter beavers' primary defenses, scent, and also exploiting one of their deficiencies, which is their eyesight. So their ambushing strategies actually seem really well adapted to capitalize and take advantage of beavers. So that's really cool. I mean, we are really excited to actually document this because it seems to make intuitive sense. And there's a lot of things in ecology that seem to make intuitive sense, but the data never really bears it out. So it was really fascinating to actually see that be the case here. The other thing that we think, based on some of this work I described, as well as other work that I haven't had time to talk about, is we think that beavers are actually really challenging prey for wolves to catch and kill. Wolves really are not that successful at killing beavers most of the time. Oftentimes, wolves will spend a bunch of time trying to ambush beavers, but they really won't catch and kill that many. And so the question is, why not? And we think it's because beavers are a challenge. Beavers don't spend much time on land, and even when they do spend time on land, beavers are challenging to predict where they will be. Oftentimes, beavers have multiple feeding trails they're using at any one time. They have a dam, they have scent mounds, they have all these areas that they've been active. And a wolf has to pick one of those spots to wait. And if the beaver doesn't come on land at that spot, they're out of luck. And so we think that wolves probably actually have quite a challenge just predicting where beavers will be on land. And then there's the physical challenge of actually killing the beaver once the beaver's on land. And we don't think that killing beavers is very easy either, because beavers have sharp teeth and are quite large and muscular. However, this idea of beavers being challenging to kill is something that's new with our work. If you had read through the scientific literature, you'd get this impression that killing beavers was really easy. It was sort of like going to the vending machine and just hitting a button and a beaver would be dispensed and that's dinner. But that's not really how it works. But anyways, to give you a few ideas of what the literature said prior to our work, here's a quote from Meach et al. 2015, where they said, "A beaver's only defense is water. So once trapped on land, the beaver is doomed." Hall 1971, "Beaver are awkward and slow on land and undoubtedly easy prey for wolves to catch and kill." And then Salandre et al. 2017, "On land, beaver are rather helpless when attacked by a large predator." And this was a paper that was looking at how beavers change their foraging in response to wolves. So again, all of this suggests beavers are pretty easy to kill, but we suggest that they're not. And to provide some evidence for that, I'm going to show here a video clip. And what this video is the only documented video footage of a wolf killing a beaver that exists in the world, to our knowledge. And this video was taken in Quebec by Trent Stanger in the fall of 2015. And we actually published a paper on this particular observation because it's so interesting. So I'm going to show the first probably 30 seconds or so, because I think it shows exactly how challenging beavers can be to kill.
Oh, it's not a beaver. Video it. I got it. Yeah, they got it.
So I'm not going to show any more because the video is a couple minutes long, but if you want to watch the full video, if you type in wolf beaver on YouTube, I think this is one of the first videos that comes up. But we think that this video, though it's only one observation, provides some pretty good evidence that killing beavers is not so easy. We think that for a couple reasons. The first is beavers fight back, which is not surprising. Throughout this video, the wolf or the beaver is constantly turning around and trying to bite the wolf on the face. And in a few instances, the beaver actually connected and bit the wolf, causing the wolf to drop the beaver and jump back. In this particular instance, that wasn't really a big deal because the beaver was so far from deep water. But you can imagine if a wolf was killing a beaver right on the edge of a pond or something, that the wolf releasing the beaver for a second or two might be the difference between the wolf killing the beaver and the beaver escaping to deep water. The other thing here is that this is a small beaver. I'd guess probably about 10 kilograms or something. Adult beavers in our area frequently get above 20 kilograms. So if this beaver was twice the size, you can imagine that this interaction would probably be quite different. The other important thing was right when this encounter occurred, right once the wolf sort of dragged the beaver into the road, the beaver actually escaped and ran about 7 or 8 meters before the wolf caught it and dragged it back. Again, that wasn't really consequential in this particular encounter, but if this was occurring on the edge of water, that sort of escape for a short period would be the difference between the beaver escaping or the wolf killing it. So because of all these things, we think that it's almost certain that beavers do escape wolf predation in some instances, or physically defend themselves from wolves and actually reach deep water after being attacked. And there's actually some good evidence for this in Voyagers National Park. So Dr. Steve Windels, who's a wildlife biologist in Voyagers, has been studying beavers in Voyagers for over 15 years now. And part of what he does is he ear tags beavers, and then he also takes a lot of measurements of them. And one of the things that he measures are their tails. He takes a lot of measurements on their tails, and he notes any injuries. And as he's done this, he's noticed several beavers that have these sort of mysterious circular puncture wounds through their tails. And these aren't from other beavers, because when beavers bite each other, the wounds look very different. And they're not from bullet holes or anything like this. So what we think makes the most sense is these are actually wounds from predators, particularly or almost certainly wolves, because wolves are really the only predator of beavers in our area, or at least the main predator. And so we think these are beavers that have actually escaped wolf predation. And it's not hard to understand how a wolf would actually, or how a beaver would actually get these wounds. Throughout this video that I just showed, the wolf was constantly grabbing the beaver's tail and yanking it backwards. So if a beaver had an interaction with the wolf and then escaped, we would actually expect there probably to be some wounds on the tail. So while we've learned quite a bit about how wolves actually ambush beavers and hunt beavers, we think that there's still a lot to be learned. And really, I think we're still at sort of the tip of the iceberg. And I think a lot of the most interesting questions are still to be answered. And so some of these questions that we're hoping to answer are things such as, when do wolves hunt beavers? So we've looked at how wolves have chosen where to wait for beavers. But the next question is sort of answering, well, when are wolves waiting to hunt beavers? And does that match up with when beavers are most active on land? Similarly, what age beavers are wolves killing? Are wolves killing the adult beavers, which are typically the ones spending the most time on land, but also the ones that are the biggest and probably most challenging to kill? Or are they killing the smaller beavers, which likely are not spending as much time on land, but are probably more vulnerable to predation? And then lastly, do different wolves have different hunting strategies to catch beavers? And do different strategies correspond to differences in hunting success? So there's a lot that we still hope to answer, and hopefully in the coming years we'll be able to. So with that, if you're interested in learning any more about what I talked about today, check out this recent paper of ours that was published in the journal Behavioral Ecology. This paper is actually available on our website, voyagerswolfproject.org. You can go on there, download a PDF if you want to read more about sort of how we did this work and some of our other findings of that work. And then with that, I need to acknowledge all sorts of different organizations that have made our project possible. I'm not going to go through all of them, but all of these organizations are really helpful into making our project what it is. And with that, I'll take any questions. And before I do, I want to note that if you don't follow, or if you want to learn more about our project and don't already follow us on social media, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we share a lot of our findings. And then additionally, the beginning parts of my talk were also largely based on some other work we've done on wolf-beaver interactions. And so the citations for those papers are here in the lower right corner. And you can again go on our website and actually find PDFs of all of those papers if you're interested. So with that, I'll take any questions that people have.
Wow, thank you so much again, Tom, for sharing all of this really fascinating research. It's fascinating to learn about, and we have lots of good questions coming in. And with you just talking about your Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, this is a very relevant question because here at Wolf Park, we all really enjoy seeing all of your trail cam footage that you put up on your social media. Do you feel that sharing your videos and photos from these trail cams on social media has gained more support and funding for your project?
Yes, absolutely. Without a doubt. I mean, I think trail cameras have, in a place like Voyagers National Park and the surrounding area, people can't readily show up and see wolves. We get a lot of people who ask us, where can I come to see wolves in your area? And it's like, you don't see them. But trail cameras provide us a way to actually observe them, to see the wolves being themselves. And that's really amazing, I think, for us and for people who are familiar with the area, and for people who aren't even familiar with the area, to see wolves in a different part of the country or the world, and also to see some of the unique behaviors that we've captured our wolves doing. So certainly I would say that that is a huge, it's been a wonderful thing for us, both for research and for outreach.
Excellent to hear. And we have several questions related to the people actually working on this project. So how many people are on your team at Voyagers? Do you use interns or volunteers for it? And if the average citizen wants to become involved in any way, are there volunteer opportunities for them as well?
Sure, that's a great question. So we have 2 full-time people working on the project, so myself, and then Austin Honkus, who's a field biologist. So we're the only two that are working full-time. Dr. Joe Bump works a lot on the project, but he's faculty at University of Minnesota. And then we have 2 graduate students at Northern Michigan University who are working on various aspects of the project. And then we've got a field crew of 5 to 6 people typically in most field seasons that are volunteer field technicians that are really making this work possible. In terms of people wanting, other people helping out with the project, we get a lot of requests, probably a couple a week, of people who want to come work on the project, or not work, but do some volunteer work. And unfortunately, we just don't have a really easy way to integrate people into the project that way, because so much of our work is in remote settings with sort of a lot of logistical challenges of traveling. We've got to do get around by boats and things like that we just can't accommodate that. So if people want to get involved, or help out the project, the easiest ways to do that are to follow us on social media, share our content so that a lot of more people can learn about the project, and also people can donate to the project and help purchase things like trail cameras and GPS collars and all those things that make this work possible.
Excellent. And we have several very numerous beaver related questions. So several people are interested in learning how you actually got the data for the active beaver lodges. And we have a question about whether you use planes primarily for detecting different beaver lodges and areas where they use them. And also, did COVID kind of hamper any of your research by plane? Because I know that's factored into some of the red wolf research that got delayed in North Carolina because of COVID.
Sure. So we do all of our beaver surveys using a plane. Voyagers National Park has a float plane that we use. And so usually it's about 5 or 6 days of flying in a lot of circles, circling to find all the beaver lodges. And we usually do that in the fall when all the leaves are down and beavers build these big food caches, so you can easily determine which ones are active and which ones aren't. So that's a really important thing for us to know where those active lodges are. In terms of COVID, I think COVID put a wrench in everything for everybody. We actually got through, I'd say, pretty much unscathed for the most part from our fieldwork aspects, including things like during our aerial survey. There was some risk. It was myself, I'm the observer, and there's a pilot. So the two of us sort of had risk, that we could get infected from each other because we're in an enclosed space. Luckily, I don't really see anybody during the field season because we're in the field all the time. So it was pretty low risk, but that didn't end up being a problem. So luckily things have been pretty smooth in that regard.
Well, that is certainly good to hear. Some more beaver questions related to accuracy and success of that ambushing technique. Are there any ways to actually measure that accuracy? And with such small kill sites, do you have an actual estimate on the accuracy, and how many do you think you actually miss?
So I would say on sort of the success rate, I'll start there. We have, and this is a real bummer for us, we don't know how successful wolves really are. We don't know, we can't really measure, because we can't determine how many kills are the result of ambushing versus opportunism. We have no way to determine, what their actual success rate is. And so that's really frustrating, I would say, just because that'd be such a cool piece of information to have. But we don't. And I don't know if we'll ever get that, because without being able to observe them, making kills. You know, unless GPS collar data just gets really great over the next 10 years or something, you know, it's going to be a tough thing to figure out. Then what was the second question there? Oh, about finding the kills. Okay, yeah. So we with our kills and you know, do we miss any kills? I'm sure we've missed a few kills, but I think our accuracy is pretty good right now. Mainly because we take such care to make sure people working on our project really know what they're looking for. It's one of those things that once you sort of figure out what you're looking for, it ends up not being that. I mean, it's challenging, but it doesn't end up being that challenging. It's more of developing sort of the search image. And oftentimes people come in and they think about like, oh, I'm going to go find these kills. And so they're looking for blood, they're looking for tons of hair, bones, and things like that. But that's not what you have to look for when you're trying to find these kills in the summer. You have to look for disturbed vegetation, or the leaf litter is all messed up or something. And they're very different things to cue in on, and they're not sort of, I'd say, the easiest. Really what you're looking for, things that aren't normal. And to know what's not normal, you have to know what normal is, and that just takes time. So usually we have sort of a 2 to 3 month, I guess you could say, like training program that we put people working on our project, and we're there sort of every day going out and observing kills that we've already identified so they can figure it out. And we run a series of blind tests with our technicians to ensure that they're finding all of the kills that they should before we let them go do it themselves. And this is all to ensure that we're not missing kills, or at least missing a very small amount of them.
Very interesting. We have another kind of related question to that is, has there been any research looking at predation the other way, having the beaver GPS collared or tracked in some way to see when and by who the beaver are being predated by?
So there have been some studies that have, you know, people have tagged beavers and seen what's killed them. The challenge is beavers are actually a really tough species to tag with a GPS tracking device because they don't have a neck, and because they're going in and out of their lodge underwater. There's a real risk that any attached tracking device might get snagged on wood, and then the animal could drown. So right now, there's really not a good tracking device that's sort of a long-term tracking device. There are GPS tracking devices that researchers will put on the backs of beavers. They'll actually shave the fur, and they'll actually like glue a transmitter on. Problem is those only last about 4 weeks, because once the hair grows back, the device falls off. Some people have tried to put tracking transmitters on beavers' tails. Those oftentimes will either rip out or for some other reason won't work, so that's not great. And then there's obviously surgically implanting transmitters, but that's a real challenge for researchers because there's a lot of logistics involved there, and that's not super easy. So I'd say the long story, or sort of this is a long story to make a very brief point. Basically, like, nope, it's challenging to track beavers, and so there's really not been a lot of great work that's identified, you know, how many beavers are getting killed by wolves. There are some estimates, but I wouldn't say they're robust.
Very interesting. And another excellent question, would you say that most of the wolves in the park ecosystem are likely born there, or do you think there are many wolves that might be immigrating in from Canada or other areas of the Great Lakes region, and could that potentially impact their skill at ambushing?
Sure. So I would be very surprised if, well, we're not done a genetic study, so I can't make a huge claim, but I can just, based on where our collared wolves travel to, I can only assume that we have wolves in our ecosystem from a variety of other areas. So we've had collared wolves that are tagged in Voyagers that end up in places like Manitoba, southern Minnesota, in Ontario, all over the place. So we have wolves going hundreds of kilometers. So I suspect it's the same way in return. So we're sort of connected to the whole population in Ontario. And so it's sort of one contiguous population. So we likely have wolves coming in from other places. We do know of some that also stick around. It certainly is possible that wolves from other areas could come in, and they might have a lot of experience hunting beavers and be good at it. Or you could have wolves coming from areas where there's not a lot. You know, if a wolf came from, say, southern Minnesota or parts of Wisconsin, there's not a real high density of beavers, and they might not have that much experience. What we don't know is how much sort of this hunting behavior is sort of connected to experience, or how do wolves actually learn it? And that's the next, I'd say, really fascinating behavioral question is how is this behavior? Is it learned? Is it transmitted between offspring and parents, or who knows what? And so that's going to be a question we really want to answer. That's going to be a really hard one to answer, but we hope someday we can.
Yeah, I hope so. And another good one, somebody commented, based on what they've read and seen from Yellowstone, beaver numbers in the park actually increased once wolves and other predators were reintroduced. Does your data match this finding from Yellowstone at all?
So I'd say that there's a few points to make. The first is that Voyagers and Yellowstone are radically different ecosystems in for a variety of reasons. And the history of sort of beavers and wolves in both of those ecosystems are very different. Our areas, Voyagers National Park never lost their wolf population, unlike most of North or of the United States. So we've always had wolves, and the beaver population has remained at really high densities for decades. So there's not been anything noticeable that we can tell there. The other point worth making is in Yellowstone, there's been a lot that suggested that the increase in beavers is related to wolf population numbers. But there's some other work that suggests that likely isn't true, because beavers were being actively reintroduced in the Yellowstone area or just outside of Yellowstone. And so there's likely other factors at play that could explain why beavers increased there. And the increase with the wolf population might be coincidental rather than sort of connected.
Thank you. Another person said, you mentioned that wolves are waiting for hours for beavers. How do you distinguish these wolves that are waiting for beavers to ambush from wolves simply resting for long periods after they successfully kill a beaver?
So that's a good point. So we consider, if we find a kill and the wolf is sitting there eating a beaver at a beaver pond, we consider any activity around that beaver pond by that wolf in 5 days after that kill to be associated with the kill. So we wouldn't consider it, let's say the wolf is resting after eating a beaver at a pond. We're not going to say, oh, now it's ambushing them. Maybe it was trying to ambush them. We don't know. We generally try to err on the conservative side to ensure that all of the ambushing attempts that we've documented are really ambushing attempts. And so that means we might exclude some that actually are ambushing attempts, but we'd rather be safe and make sure that all the ones in our sample are actual attempts. The way though, like let's say we went and saw a wolf bedding by a beaver pond and there hadn't been a kill, we've got a more objective criteria of how we actually identify these ambushing attempts, which I didn't go into details on, but it basically entails that a wolf has to be within a certain distance of fresh, active beaver sign for us to consider it a hunting attempt or an ambushing attempt. And so there is an objective standard. I just didn't get into it because it's confusing if people aren't familiar with sort of what beaver, being around beaver ponds is like, I think.
That makes total sense. Do you take into account elevation and topography when looking at wolf location for ambushing? And could that potentially impact factors such as how the wind might carry their scent?
So we did not include anything with topography. We definitely thought about it. But at the end of the day, we just don't have that much topography. I mean, there is some sloping in certain areas. We thought about it more from like the attack. Is there a benefit to being uphill and chasing after a beaver or whatever? In terms of the wind direction, we definitely didn't. Capturing the way wind moves around a beaver pond is a really challenging thing. It's, in fact, you almost can't replicate it. We couldn't go back to that spot and figure out what the exact conditions were when the wolf was there. And so we have to use sort of a proxy. And so we used data from a weather station in Voyagers National Park and made sort of the general assumption that that was probably on average indicative of the actual wind conditions. And of course, there's all sorts of nuances to wind. I mean, if you want a really fascinating book, there's a great book called Predator-Prey Dynamics, The Role of Olfaction, which is basically the role of scent. And it's a book by Michael Conover, and it talks about, it's very accessible, I think, but it talks about how scent changes with all sorts of things. It's fascinating. And when you start reading that, you just realize like how much we can't capture everything that's going on with scent. And so we have to use sort of generalizations.
Makes sense. And we have somebody that saw a video of the Wolf Park wolf cutout Wolfgang, who was used as a fake wolf decoy to study how beavers might notice or not notice a wolf laying in ambush. Did they notice that it was fake right away due to being 2D and having no smell or noise?
So that's a good question. So yes, so we came up with I'd say it's more of a fun experiment than, I think we might have had some scientific aspirations, but it was more a proof of concept, where we took a metal cutout decoy of a wolf, which we used a nice photo from Monty Sloan at Wolf Park, and put it on beaver trails that beavers were using to see if beavers would respond to the presence of the visual sight of a wolf sitting there. And basically beavers didn't respond at all from what we could tell, which is not surprising. Like I said, their eyesight is terrible. We did not put any scent with it, which some on social media were in uproar that we couldn't make a lot of good determinations because we didn't put scent. But we are specifically not putting scent because we wanted to only look at eyesight alone, because what our work on wolf ambushing behavior had shown is that wolves are choosing spots where they can't be detected via scent. And so the only way a beaver would be able to detect them is via eyesight. And beavers do not seem able to do that.
And also have a question about bears in the study, because someone noticed you are carrying bear repellent spray in that video you had of yourself.
Mm-hmm. So we do have black bears in our area. They're not really a problem. We've never had any. We've had a few close calls in the sense where we've incidentally stumbled upon a bear and her cubs or something like that, but nothing that I would say is like an actual attack. In fact, I would say we probably carry our bear spray more for people than we do for bears, because we're in a lot of remote areas, often by ourselves, and you just never know who you're going to find out there. And it's nice to have something should you ever need it. Luckily, we haven't needed it yet, but you never know. Maybe one day we will. Hopefully not.
Well, I'm glad you guys are staying safe from bears and wayward humans.
Yep.
We have quite a few questions regarding the potential expansion of this research into other areas or partnerships with other programs. People are interested in where this research might lead to. So if you want to talk a little bit about where this research might be going, its impact globally, and whether you might be expanding into any other research areas with this similar topic.
So we're always open to collaborating with other researchers, and we have several ongoing active collaborations with our project and other either agencies or universities or things like that. The wolf world is not wolf research world is not that big of a world. So where our project is going is we're trying to establish the project as a long-term research project that joins places like Isle Royale and Yellowstone as sort of these long-term iconic research programs. Our sort of other goal is not only to do sort of really interesting new research, but also to make that research accessible to a large, broad audience via our social media. So we're really interested in sort of pairing, I guess what you could say is like novel wolf research with really effective outreach and education, because we think that's really important. I think oftentimes science occurs or appears to occur in sort of this little vacuum, and everyone in the scientific field gets excited, but then it goes nowhere beyond that. And I think our goal is to take a lot of what we do and share that with people, because we think that brings a lot of value to the work, and also people enjoy it. And we think, the enjoyment and appreciation of our natural resources, not just wolves, but ecosystems as a whole, is really important for sort of the preservation of those areas. So we're hoping that we can get funding to keep us going long term. It'll be interesting to see if that works. We'll see if that happens, but that's our hope, and that's where we're going. And we'll see where things shake out.
Great to hear. We hope your research will definitely become a long-term and long-standing project. I think we have one good final question to end on, because we want to make sure we're respectful of your time. And that is there anything from your research that was surprising to you or that you didn't expect?
You know, this is going to sound funny. What was most surprising to me was how well it worked out. Or it sort of told the story. I mean, oftentimes it's easy. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the field along with my other colleagues too, and we all sit and think about these things, and we all have these ideas, and oh, this should make the most sense, and oh, wolves should do this. We start to think of wolves as if they're people or robots that, you know, or know the best optimal ways to do things, and that's not necessarily always the case, or at least it doesn't work out the way you'd hope because you can't measure it the right way or something. So the fact that we were able to document this, and we started documenting these ambushing attempts, you know, in 2015, had absolutely no idea where that would lead us to, you know, if it would give us anything useful or just, you know, would be a bunch of, you know, gibberish in a sense. And so the fact that it worked out and really showed us how wolves are doing this and why was really fascinating and really satisfying, because many aspects of our work do not work out that cleanly, I would say. So that was really a great surprise.
Well, that's definitely fun to hear that it worked out a whole lot better than expected. Again, very fascinating research. And thank you again, Tom, so much for graciously giving your time to us this evening and teaching us all lots of new things about wolves and beavers and new ways of how wolves hunt, which is really continuing to shape and change the whole field of wolf hunting research. Very incredible. So thank you again for taking your time to give this presentation and answer all of these wonderful questions that everyone had. We hope to see all of you who attended this program again at future virtual programs, and hopefully again at Wolf Park, hopefully sometime in the future as well, in person, if we can get back to doing more in-person things. But thank you all again. This program will be posted on YouTube if anybody wants to rewatch it. It'll be up there within the next couple days. So thank you again, Tom, and thank you to everybody who watched and asked questions.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.